Welcome to Dronecast, rethinking public safety one drone at a time, a podcast by DroneSense. We explore real-world applications of drones in emergency response, offering a close examination of evolving trends in drone technology and its impact on public safety. I'm your host, John McLeod, Director of Customer Success here at DroneSense.
Welcome to Dronecast, rethinking public safety one drone at a time, where we revisit past episodes to bring you the most impactful insights and essential strategies on how drones are revolutionizing emergency response. From life-saving solutions to enhanced support for public safety professionals, these episodes dive into the tools, techniques, transforming communities, and keeping us all safer.
Hello, and welcome to Dronecast. I'm your host, John McLeod. Today, we have the privilege of chatting with Matt Rybar, Vice President of Special Projects at Unmanned Vehicle Technologies. Matt has a bachelor's in electrical engineering and law enforcement experience as a patrol deputy in the Kent County Sheriff's Department in Michigan, and currently is a patrol officer and emergency manager with the Huron-Clinton Metro Parks. Matt's work at UVT sets him apart as one of the leading UAS hardware and solutions providers in public safety in the United States. I'm pleased to call Matt a valued partner and a friend. Thanks for taking time to speak with us today, Matt.
Well, thanks for having me, John. I'm really excited for the conversation.
Awesome. Well, jumping into it, one of the things I would say is looking at your background, you're kind of tailor-made and unique for working in public safety UAS, as you both have that electrical engineering degree, you've got patrol experience, you've got emergency management experience, you got long experience in a drone team in law enforcement. So you've got kind of both the practical public safety and also nerd cred. And I say that with nothing but love as a fellow nerd in a software company. How do you describe yourself? How do you think about yourself these days?
Well, it's funny because when you word it like that, it's a bit of an identity crisis over the years, no doubt about that. But my passion's always been in public safety, and I took a detour into engineering in the tech world right out of college. But public safety is always kind of where things pulled back for me. And so now to be at UVT and connecting all the dots of both integrating public safety technology with ground response efforts on the public safety side, it just seems like a natural fit. So I know that my roots will always be in public safety in some capacity, but I just have a really rigorous desire of integrating technology into the industry and helping move the industry along with technology to make both people safer as well as responders safer.
So take us back in the Wayback Machine. From my understanding, you're at Kent County at the time. You've got a drone program because you're technology forward. When did you see the bridge between public safety and UAS technology? Like, what was that?
You know, it was funny because it was early on. There was a lot of calls that seemed interesting that a drone might be able to be used for. I was thinking about that and preparing for this conversation was even back then, the word drone had such a negative connotation. And back then, you wouldn't do a presentation in 2016 and it was like, you must only call it an unmanned aircraft system. Drones are for the military, bad public connotation. So even thinking about how that's adapted over the years is just very interesting. But in 2016, the regulatory environment started to change. And at the same time, our team program, we were thinking about what to do and how to head in that direction. And so, but the regulatory environment changing is what spearheaded a lot of these programs getting their true starting points. And I was fortunate enough at the time to have founded my own consulting business in 2016. At the same time, we started down the path of an agency drone program. I was getting both sides of the house. I was helping our agency start the program, as well as helping many other agencies, predominantly in the state of Michigan, start their programs. And so I'll never forget in some onboarding training I had in 2017, firearms actually, our firearms instructor, Sergeant Tom Raymond, said, "Hey, I heard you might know something about drones." And from there, the rest of our program took off. Sergeant Raymond, TR, and Sergeant Roon at the time, who's now Captain Roon, the three of us were the founding team of our technical services unit at Kent County. And at Kent County, our desire was for that team to not just be a drone team and to, over time, be a technology team that other technologies could fall under that. You have experts in that group that would train and learn those and become true experts at that field. It's really awesome to see looking back and talking with the team now about how that's evolved over the last few years, especially since I've been gone. So it's really cool to see what these programs are going to do in the future.
You allude to the changing world of compliance. We're using the federal airspace when we do our work with UAS, but the underlying inherent technology, the hardware has changed a lot in that same time period. So take us back to 2016 again too, and the nucleus of that program What were you guys using technology-wise, and how does that compare to the capabilities of what you can use today in public safety?
Technology has come a long ways. It truly has. In all aspects, obviously, technology moves so quickly, often quite faster than the regulatory environment ever moves. And we'll get into that later in this conversation, I'm sure. But at the time, these aircraft that we were flying, they had a lot of capabilities, but there were a lot of limitations as well. I remember when the first thermal camera came out on a small aircraft, we all thought it was just an amazing piece of technology. Well, now looking back, we have thermal cameras on small aircrafts that are 10 times the quality. And so trying to keep that in perspective of early on what use cases were there and successful, a lot of those things have evolved over the years too. Many agencies got started with crash and crime scene reconstruction projects for the simple purpose of it was a localized scene. The aircraft didn't have to fly very far. They could capture this data in a different way, an aerial way, and still trust that that aircraft is above you. It's not a beyond visual line of sight or a long ways out. It's very close to your incident scene, but you're still getting a lot of value in that program. Also, public trust was a big conversation back then, and it sure is now, where how do you step into these programs in a systematic capacity that shows you're using these drones for good and that you are using them to provide value to both the citizens you're serving and to some things like evidentiary process and other procedures in that way. And so it's really interesting to see how that has evolved over time. But also it's interesting to see that a lot of the roots of these programs still start the same way today than they did in 2016. The technologies move, but the foundation of many of these programs are the same. Kind of thinking through how that evolution from a technology side really has ramped up. One of my last keynote callouts I was on at Kent County was an officer-involved shooting, and it turned into a vehicle pursuit. The vehicle crashed, suspect vehicle crashed into the woods, and 5 occupants fled on foot. And so through that process, a perimeter was set up. Over 30 units were involved in this perimeter. K9s were deployed, and I was instructed to keep the drone in the vehicle and to go ahead and go run with K9 instead due to staffing that we had at the time. So fast forward a couple hours, command finally authorizes the use of the drone, and legitimately, no joke, John, within 30 seconds, I have to get the drone up in the air, and there's this glowing hot vehicle in the woods, and I'm like, wait a second, that shouldn't be there. And sure as can be, these 5 suspects opened unlocked vehicle in the middle of the woods of a homeowner and all holed up in the car, and that's where they were at. And so thinking through kind of back to 2016, would our technology even have allowed us to see that from the capabilities? It's like, nope, probably not. So 5 years later, that technology evolution is really incredible to think through.
It's interesting the way you talk about our community relations and the way we tell stories in public safety UAS to help tie those things together, particularly to communities where they're reassessing the relationship between public safety and the communities, what they owe each other, transparency, clear communications. Is that how, when you talk to public safety agencies, you recommend them to communicate with their communities using kind of these stories about these great use cases and successes we've had? Or is it metrics, or is it some mix of both?
I think it's a combination of both. Today, it's even more important to get out there and show your public how you're using that technology. And absolutely, the data is important on different aspects of the growth and justifying different aspects of your growth plan and maybe what equipment you may need or how you should ramp up staffing or different aspects. But at its core, trying to engage with your public that you serve and show them exactly how you're using the technology and exactly how you're not using the technology is just so interesting and so important, really at every phase of the game. You look at programs that are just so robust and so developed. Arlington Police Department, I was with them 2 weeks ago, and it was amazing to hear Rob Robertson, who runs that team, his perspective about public trust and public buy-in. And their program is 9 or 10 years old now, and they are still laser focused on making sure that that's an imperative part of their scale plan of the program. And so whether you're starting out, it's so important to get the public trust and buy-in early on, but you have to just be very diligent through that process to keep it alive and keep that going, keep that in your forefront, because it's very important for your program success.
You kind of set us up with this timeline of about 8 years since 2016, where you've been in consulting or with UVT in the UAS space. The world changed quite a lot in that time period. We were locked up at home. We had a pandemic. There was an economic recession. A lot of things have happened in technology and compliance. When you think about working with public safety agencies, particularly law enforcement in both of those spaces. Are you working with them the same way consistently across all those years, or has that evolved as well too?
That's evolved over the years. It's interesting. Early on in public safety programs, training is such a great example. And you and I have talked training so many times, but training is such a great example where the needs of an agency from a training perspective change drastically as that program evolves. And so the early adopters need something very different than those people coming into the program later on. Public safety has one of the most interesting communities in terms of information sharing. And agencies do such a great job across the country sharing information, lending a hand to people starting out. And so the consulting world has changed in many capacities too, because the early adopters need a lot more intense assistance in those types of programs. But as things scale, agencies lean on other agencies for best practices, for training, for different aspects of that program growth that have definitely changed over time. So to circle it back, I would say that absolutely that's evolved over time. COVID times, of course, changed things drastically for all of our businesses. But at the core, finding ways to make sure that we are there to support the customer, to make their problems our problems, that's the purpose of our organizations together. And so it's changed in ways, but also the core is just definitely there. And it just, if anything, we've all refined that and become more laser focused at that core over the years.
Let's pivot a little bit to an area that I wanted to really talk to you about and was excited about talking to you about. And I know you get excited about too, which is kind of an area of great innovation and effervescence in our space, which is really drone as a first responder and the growth of those programs across the country and globally. But to orientate folks who may be newer to that conceptually, to you, Matt, what does DFR mean?
Absolutely. So when you think public safety drone program, you always thought patrol-led response, where somebody rolls up on the scene in the squad vehicle, takes out an aircraft, and deploys it in that capacity. But as we start to talk DFR, we're essentially making that drone the responder without that person driving that drone to the scene. And so it comes in so many different shapes and sizes, but more simply put, we're trying to get that drone on scene sooner in the whole process of responding to a call. And to that extent, sometimes we can clear the calls quicker in some capacities, but really we're just trying to provide actionable intel to the humans as they respond to the scene before their arrival. And so getting that drone on scene earlier is going to be very important in that process. Having been very active on it as a first responder, the call takers do a wonderful job getting as much as possible information from a 911 caller. But we all know, if you've ever responded to a scene, that when you arrive, the information on scene is very different typically than what you heard over the phone or in that response. And it's no fault of the call taker. Goodness, I could never do that job. But it's because people don't always give the correct information, or things just get lost in the shuffle of a high energy, high intense life or death situation at times. And so getting that drone on scene sooner gives you that actionable intel as you're responding. Or in some cases, it might allow you to scale up or scale down a public safety response based off of that intel. So it's getting that information sooner in the whole process.
Yeah, and I love how you're talking about basically comprehensive situational awareness and adding that into the picture. And also, to your point, there are a lot of permutations of DFR programs across the country. People are coming at it different ways. You guys have been super involved in DFR from the very beginning in particular, and seem to really have enthusiasm for it. When you're talking to communities, to agencies who are thinking about a DFR program, what is it that you feel like really makes, hey, the time is ripe? They're the right parameters for that kind of a program. And are those parameters things like geography or urban density or airspace or response time? Is it all of those things? Is it something different in your mind?
So it's all of the above. And I think we're all fortunate, both the UVT and DroneSense teams, is we're not just new to the technology DFR space or the technology public safety space. Both of our organizations have a long history of working with customers through that evolution. And so it's kind of the next step for many agencies as they look at other ways to expand their programs. But it's not just a new, hey, we never had a drone program, therefore we're going to start a DFR program. It's really that evolution of the program that just becomes very valuable. But in terms of what you're looking for, urban density is a huge benchmark for that right for a DFR situation, mainly from a hardware side with where the industry is at, a BV loss side, which we'll talk about in a bit, just all the different aspects. The density of your call volume is going to be really important. Like I said, not just the density of the population, but truly where that call volume is and where you're planning to deploy that type of program. There's often a direct correlation between the two. Pretty shocking. The more people you have in an area, probably the more 911 calls you're going to have in a given time. So that's a really interesting way to approach it. Back to the city of Arlington, they had a pretty unique way that they decided where they were going to put their DFR sites. They ran call history for all calls for service across the city that could be possibly cleared with the drone without that person responding to the unit or responding to the call as well. So those types of calls were motorist assist, suspicious persons, suspicious vehicles, and other types of calls that were lower priority calls, but typically an officer would respond to the scene. They'd do an area check. They'd respond unable to locate or gone on arrival, and then they'd clear that call. And Arlington, based off of that mentality, is clearing over 40% of the calls in those targeted areas using the DFR aircraft for that process. And so, like we talked about before, there are so many different ways you can start down the path, but that data you can gather and the quickest route to that data is going to help you justify your DFR program and your next steps as you consider to take it forward.
One of the things I've noticed is DFR is becoming more common when I read in the newspaper every day, in the public consciousness. I mean, in sci-fi shows. And the ubiquitous of it has always been tied to drones that are using docks or drone in a box, however you want to call it. It's starting to become synonymous with DFR. But that's not always the first step or the first phase in starting a DFR program for a variety of different reasons. So I'd love to hear from you, for folks who are going down that path or made the decision to go down that path. What's kind of the best phase one and why?
So oftentimes a fully integrated DFR system is not the best first step for an organization. And so don't be afraid of starting with that DFR 1.0 solution. What is DFR 1.0? Well, it's visual observer on the rooftop. Sometimes that visual observer is the pilot that's physically flying that aircraft to the calls. Other times that pilot could be in a remote operations center at a different location. But that DFR 1.0 solution allows you to start down the process of gathering actionable intel, understanding what that program could look like, testing out a launch site before you build out a bunch of infrastructure there. And so all of those different aspects are just so important that help you build the data for that program. Also, I would argue that every agency across the country that has a drone program can do a DFR 1.0 solution at basically no cost. And how do you do that? Well, you have an aircraft, you have a drone team that's trained and certified. Sure, there's some regulatory things that you must overcome and you have to operate within your current approvals, but you could still, in most situations, start to gather data for a couple hours a week or a couple hours a shift, rotating your teams through those positions. And so there are so many easy ways to start out that DFR program without diving all the way deep in. Now, the agencies that would like to dive deep in and have those fully integrated systems, well, thankful there's companies like UBT and DroneSense that can help navigate that whole process. But it's really important to start small and really find ways to gather that data, test your theories, test your launch sites, and then evolve that program from there. I would be remiss to say that public trust has to come into that process as well. And so when you start to build that public trust through your normal drone program, through your DFR program, if you have data to show how you got to your conclusions about how you're going to operate, even what hours, what shifts you're going to operate, launch locations, and show exactly how you selected all of that, it's going to be a more seamless process on the public trust side because they're going to understand that you did the research and homework to enable this robust DFR program. It wasn't just like, hey, let's get a bunch of equipment and toss it out there and see what we can do.
So let's pivot a little bit to the area that you and I probably nerd out on a little bit more and is exciting. And let's talk a little bit about the fun stuff around dock solutions. These are really interesting pieces of equipment. And I'm not going to call them toys, but they sure are fun to play with and really, really cool. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of the dock solutions you guys are offering today and what you like about them?
Absolutely. Well, what don't I like about them? That would be the better place to start oftentimes because it's any nerd in the drone space. The docks over the last 2 years have really revolutionized our thinking and thought process. You could absolutely remotely control aircraft before, but the thought of having a dock and being a seamless remote operation is just so incredible. And we've got 4 docks on a platform at our demo site. And every time I pull in there, I'm still just so impressed about those capabilities on those different platforms. As of right now, the main docks that people are deploying across the country is the DJI Dock 1 and the DJI Dock 2. That is what most programs doing remote operations are built on currently. The DJI Dock 1 has been out for about a year and a half, a little longer than that, a year and a half or so now. And the DJI Dock 2 is just right for the pickings, just came out a couple weeks ago, or about a month and a half ago now. And so those two products, you have so many agencies deciding which one's better for their operations, which one might fit their operational capacity in a better light or whatnot. And so, but those are the two most robust products on the market. We're exploring other solutions as well. There's some upcoming manufacturers, Hextronics, OmniDock, Autel has an Evo Nest. So there's a lot of other solutions that we've tested and deployed even to some customers. But back to the basics, DJI docks are what most folks are using as they start to prove out many of the programs that they have. A lot of that's the easy button for them too, because most of their fleets are already built around those types of aircraft. And so it's just very seamless for them to step into those platforms as well. So it's going to be really exciting to see what the next few years have. There needs to be a large step forward on some hardware and other solutions to really enable true DFR capabilities in a BVLOS environment. And there's a few manufacturers out there that are really charging at that. So really excited to see what comes out next.
Since we're on that, what features do you wish were on them today that you see coming down the pipe at some point, but just like, gosh, if they just had X, Y, and Z, it would really move the needle? Is there something in specific that comes to mind?
It's all around response times, to be honest, John. The DFR programs are meant to reduce response times. And so some of the technology out there today with the Dock 1, and even the Dock 2, are a little delayed in getting those aircraft up off the ground. And so number one, I would say DFR programs need an aircraft that can launch and respond in a little bit quicker manner. And so there's some improvements that can be made there. Also, some of these docks for pretty small platforms. And so looking at a more purpose-built aircraft, larger aircraft potentially, that can carry different payloads, I think will be important as docks begin to scale. But what you'll find is as aircraft get bigger, docks get more complicated. There's more moving parts. There's more things like maintenance and service that need to happen on a more regular basis. And so we're in a bit of, I would say, it's not a linear motion of we improve the technology and then we get better results. We might improve the technology, but it could induce other things into that ecosystem that are needed, more service and that sort of thing.
Now, you guys might be the most experienced people of installing these dock solutions other places. You guys have had quite a few repetitions of being able to do it. And my observation has been that we've come a long way in technology. Setting one of these things up is not like pairing your new headphones to your phone. It takes some doing. They need data, they need power, they need to be positioned correctly, and there's lots of other parameters to keep in mind. What does that installation process look like typically when you guys lead an agency through it? And kind of what's the timeline it typically runs?
So like you said, power, connectivity, and location are the three pillars to me for all deployments. If you don't have any one of those, you're going to be in a tough spot when you try to start to go to deploy. And so back to the basics, those are the foundational things that you have to have checked off before you even consider trying to deploy the dock on a location. Power, very simple to accomplish on many of these solutions. Connectivity gets a bit more complex because of how the governmental sector's IT networks work and some nuances to that. So there's oftentimes some different approaches. IT requires different things depending on what size of agency you are, where you're located across the country. So that's an important piece to work with your IT teams on to figure out early on. We have some deployments, some dock deployments right now on cellular and Starlink, but they're not the long-term solution either. There's pluses and minuses to each of those solutions. If you're going to have to go in a mobile type of setting like cellular or Starlink, really recommend a combination of things to make sure that you always have that connectivity. And last is location. The most prime DFR area, we've proven out the call volume. We've understood that, hey, this is where this drone needs to be due to all of those things that are more location-based for the geography might not be the best location for a piece of hardware. And so most of the docks right now are point-to-point communications, antennas from the dock itself to the actual aircraft. And so if there's a noise in the environment, whether that be cellular or other frequency noise, sometimes there can be some issues with that. So thankfully, our manufacturers have given us a toolbox with a bunch of tests to conduct before you ever choose that location, but there's a lot that goes into that. Lastly, rooftops become a coveted location for many of these docks deployments. The problem is getting these things up on the rooftops. So we've all seen cranes, fire apparatus down at Fort Wayne a couple months ago. Might have been too windy, so we had to bring a dock off the rooftop. So a series of tow straps were involved in lowering this thing to a safe location. So There's so many different nuances to actually getting this stuff up at a rooftop or a location that's even more than the setup of the dock itself. The dock is fairly simple to set up in most situations. It's all the other factors around it that require making sure you very strategically and systematically check those boxes before you start that actual dock deployment.
So these are big pieces of equipment, right? And we set them up. We've gone through those hurdles of doing it. You illuminate us on some of them that are fairly thorny. So let's say you're an agency, you've bought one or more docks, you've got them installed in your launch sites, you're comfortable with your launch sites, you've found your emergency launch sites, you've kind of done your homework, you're ready to start betaing the program and just flying, using the hardware, starting to understand your airspace a little bit better from that perspective. What's the first steps from that stage that you recommend people take? What should they be doing?
Well, in many situations, it's important to start collecting that data and start deploying in that capacity, even before you have a BV loss waiver. There's the ability to operate with RPIC in the field, a remote pilot and command in the field as a visual observer. Start gathering that data using your equipment before you have that coveted BV loss waiver. Because unfortunately, the timelines for all of these things typically won't line up. So as soon as you get that aircraft on the rooftop, that dock on the rooftop, find ways to provide value with that equipment right away, because your bosses are going to be asking, hey, how do we use this stuff that we just put up there? And if you just wait for 6 months until you have a coveted BV loss waiver, it's going to provide a lot less value back to your command staff to show you how you're working through that. There's so many improved workflows by using the dock outside of just BV loss and not having somebody up there, whether that be data management, battery charging, environmental considerations. There's many different aspects that do provide you a lot of benefit even before you get that BV loss waiver. The big disclaimer there as well is you don't need to have a beautiful built out real-time crime center to have a robust DFR program. DFR program can be one patrol officer or one detective's laptop sitting in a cubicle in the office or sitting in the ready room or someplace around the office, starting down this process of learning how to fly DFR as well as responding to calls. You don't have to have a fancy incident response awareness built around you. A radio sit next to your laptop listening for calls for service as they come out can start to help you build those steps into one of those robust DFR programs.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've been in communities where they have fairly robust real-time crime centers that feel like you're in NASA when you walk into, again, one officer in a cubicle flying on two screens, right? And there's space for all of those programs to exist and accomplish great things. And it's a great call out too. I mean, the public safety drone community is very tight with each other, right? It feels like everybody knows everybody. So if you've got a community, I should say, if you have a program and you're missing the community part of it, please reach out. Let's introduce you to some folks. We all raise the level of the tide together. Zoom out for me one more time for a minute. You're still a young man. You've got a lot of years ahead of you in this industry. If you think about years from now, when you step away from your career, as we all do at some point, what do you want to feel like you did that made the difference? Like, what satisfaction look like for you as a professional?
You know, John, it changes all the time. And I think that's an exciting thing because it shows us that we're all on the bleeding edge of technology. If I look at a 5-year goal or a 10-year goal or even a 30-year goal for the industry, this shifts in so many different capacities. My passion, like we said from the start, is in integrating technology into public safety. And so I see at some point the drone ecosystem will continue to grow. It'll morph into other things, a part of technology and public safety. And so what I'm most excited for in the 5-year plan is to see fully BV loss autonomous solutions, a part of our public safety industry. But the long-term goals, I just really hope to continue to help move that needle in the direction of integrating this technology, getting more departments on board with using the technology, training more operators, and really just helping grow the ecosystem from the ground floor up. So it's going to be an exciting few years, that's for sure. We've talked many times about how the next year is going to have just an immense amount of growth in the industry. We think to the 5 to 10 year mark, it's going to be a whole different ecosystem, but partners like us hopefully will still be at these seats at the table at the time.
That's awesome. I mean, that's all the questions I have for you today. So it's time to pass the mic back to you for your shameless plug or to talk about whatever you're excited about working on right now and maybe tell the people how to get in touch with you if they'd like to learn more about UVT.
Sounds good. Well, first of all, thanks, John, for your time today. It was really awesome for the conversation. DroneSense has been such a value partner of UVT for so many years. I referenced back to 2018, but that's really when it all began with DroneSense and the UBT partnership. And so the relationship that our two organizations have and the synergy is incredible. We love working with all of your team. So again, thanks for the invite to this meeting today. Best place to get a hold of me is via email, matt@ubt.us, or you always can find us on the website at www.ubt.us. But thanks again, John, for all your time today. I just really appreciate it.
Dronecast, Rethinking Public Safety One Drone at a Time, is brought to you by DroneSense. To find out more about DroneSense and how our comprehensive situational awareness platform can help you fly, share, and manage your drone program, please visit DroneSense.com. That's DroneSense.com. And then make sure to search for Dronecast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that podcasts are found. Please don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at DroneSense, thanks for listening.